Rumors had been spreading for weeks in Nauru about a white dust beneath the soil that could grow whole fields of grain. It began at the turn of the century. In 1899-1900, a prospector named Albert Ellis stepped ashore on this tiny Pacific island and found a strange, crumbly rock, phosphate, the long-sought ingredient for chemical fertilizer. For remote Nauru, a coral ring of villages and pandanus, the find might have promised fortune. For the imperial powers and private companies that smelled opportunity, it promised control of a commodity that would feed continents. Almost immediately, the island was mapped not for its people, but for its seams. The Pacific Phosphate Company, born from colonial commercial interests tied to firms like John T. Arundel & Co., moved in. By 1906, industrial-scale extraction was underway. Timber, labor, company stores, and wharves followed. Ships left loaded with white rock bound for Australia and New Zealand, where it would be processed into superphosphate to boost yields on European-style farms. Tension gathered like a storm. Islanders watched as their center, the phosphate-laden plateau, was carved away. Contracts were signed in distant capitals. Deals were struck in boardrooms where decisions about tiny atolls were treated as routine business. The quiet conspiracy was not a single criminal act, but a pattern. Colonial administrations, commercial agents, and later imperial governments coordinated access to an island's wealth while the islanders' understanding, rights, and consent were sidelined. World War I reconfigured the arrangement. Germany, which had annexed Nauru in the 19th century, lost its Pacific possessions. The League of Nations mandate handed Nauru to the governments of Britain, Australia, and New Zealand, administered by Australia. In 1920, those governments formed the British Phosphate Commissioners and bought the private company's rights. The move looked like nationalization, but the beneficiaries remained the same. Phosphate shipments now funded fertilizer for Australia and New Zealand farms, and profits flowed back into metropolitan economies. Islanders received modest royalties and limited employment, but the decision-making stayed in Canberra, Wellington, and London. On the island, the extraction was relentless. The interior was stripped, leaving jagged pinnacles of limestone and expanses unfit for agriculture or habitation. Whole villages were relocated to the narrow coastal rim. The moral accounting of the enterprise darkened further during the Second World War. Japanese forces occupied Nauru in 1942. Many islanders were deported to the Carolines and elsewhere, subjected to harsh conditions. After liberation in 1945, survivors returned to an island half-eaten by mining, their land fragmented, food security disrupted, traditions disrupted. The conspiracy, as islanders and later historians would call it, was structural, an alignment of corporate appetite and imperial policy that prioritized distant agricultural needs over indigenous sovereignty. Decisions about land, environmental cost, and compensation were made with little input from the people who lived there. When Nauruans sought to contest the losses, they faced legal, financial, and political barriers across hemispheres. By the mid-20th century, Nauru's transformation was undeniable. Once a verdant atoll, it was now a patchwork of waste and industry. The phosphate that had driven the world's food supplies left the island irreversibly altered. The revenues that nourished foreign farms did not translate into adequate restoration or long-term security for the Nauruans. This is a story of discovery that did not lead to shared prosperity, but to dispossession. How a single geological find, white powder beneath a Pacific soil, became a fulcrum for a quiet, powerful alliance between empire and enterprise. It is a cautionary chapter in the history of Oceania, where the celebration of a resource discovery must be measured against the cost to the people whose lands were never theirs to sell.